talk on something that I didn't plan on talking. Just to entertain you some more. So one of the quotes from years in my master's hermitage, there are many quotes in that chapter in the Autobiography of Yogi, where Sri Teshwara says to the disciples in the ashram, "The darkness of Maya is silently approaching. Let us hie homeward within." And it's such a deep, rich experience of what yoga is about, that Maya is always there, ready to just, in a very innocuous way, in a very seemingly benign way, just find its way in. You know, if you think of dusk, that darkness just comes just gradually. You know, it's not like light, dark. It just comes in, and we're in darkness. And you know, Sri uses this word "hie," H-I-E. I don't know if you use that in Australia. Most people don't use that word in common language, but it means to quickly move or hasten. And that's an important word, because he's saying, in the context of who we are, this lifespan is going to go quickly before we cognize, wait a minute, what is my life about? So Yogananda puts into our understanding that now is the time. Not, yeah, I'll get it together, you know, when I get it together, and then I'll have time to meditate and all that. No, now is the moment. And he's saying that to each one of us. Let us hasten homeward within. Not within a house for that protection. Not within job security as that protection. Not in a relationship as that protection. But within. And it's simply overlooked a lot, because it's a wonderful statement even on a superficial level. But as we feel it, not thinking, but feel it, becomes very significant as a leverage, a catapult for us moving forward. You know, in the world of science generally, beyond what our great guru wrote in the Autobiography of Yogi, there's some interesting things to appreciate that can help us along the journey. Because I think for a lot of us, doubt comes in. Maybe not for any of you here, but doubt can come in, and it's, again, just seems like it's a reasonable thing. We're not sure. Other people are saying all these other things, and I was saying, I forget which setting, maybe it was Nara, but when I determined to move to Ananda Village, I'd come 3 years previously, the first visit, and then I came back for my Kriya initiation, and then I came back for my yoga teacher training. And finally I decided I would move to Ananda Village. And my mother was fairly concerned about it, because I didn't have a job, didn't have a home to live in, but I bought a Ford Econoline van. I don't know if you sell the equivalent, and I outfitted it. I put in shelves, put a bed in that could fold so I could put lots of stuff in there. And then just out of safety, I bought a 3 meter by 4 meter canvas tent as my backup plan for a home. And so my mother knew this, and she thought, "You're gonna do what?" And so the night, I was staying with my parents the night before. I was gonna drive off to California, and she was looking, just pained at this prospect of me going this way. And then the phone rang, and it was from Ananda, and it was Dr. Peter Van Houten, who's written a lot of articles on and the brain engineer for divinity, and he's a Kriyacharya as well, and a Ananda minister. And he runs our clinic, not our clinic anymore. We made it a separate nonprofit just down the road from Ananda Village. And at that time, in 1981, he was doing what I'm doing now, the manager of the Sangha Worldwide Outreach Ministries. And he said, so Barbara, who has been working in the office, needs to go back to her husband in Davis, California. And he said, because you've been doing a meditation group for these 3 years, would you like to work in the Sangha office. Yeah. And then, by the way, Barbara, who's leaving, as I just said to you, that she'd like to talk to you about the housing situation she's leaving. And she was living in, back then there weren't many homes on the property of Ananda village. The fire in 1976 destroyed 21 out of 22 houses on the property, and we were slowly building it back. And indeed, when I first came in 1978, I was helping build some of the geodesic domes built after the fire. But so a lot of people weren't even living on the property of Ananda, they were living close by. And there was this whole cluster of people living near where we have the clinic now, so maybe a mile and a half away. And so she lived in a 3 meter by whatever, 3 meter or longer trailer, just a pull-along trailer. And but it had electricity through extension cords running from some source, and it had running water. Now, even a lot of the homes on the property of the village itself did not have either of those. And a lot of people, we built sort of outhouse-shaped showers for people, and usually there were frogs as a part of that experience that would come into your hair. But so I said, wow, so you're leaving, Barbara, and you're okay about me living there? And she said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm from. So I got off the phone, and I was beaming like a Cheshire cat, and my mother looked at me and she thought, oh, something's happening here. And when I explained it to her, she just looked down and said, there's more to this than what I thought. Just that appreciation. And it's just what can happen because the world around us, including, my mother uses ploy, which I was sharing with Nara, that when she realized I was going to go, she attended one of our meditation group meetings, and there were about 15, 20 people there. And we were doing the Gayatri Mantra and the Mahamrityum Chakra. My mother was tossing rice into the fire. But she used this ploy. She said, what about all those people you're going to leave behind? It was the perfect ploy to really push at some buttons deeper within than just the obvious. And I said to her, I appreciate that. But I've also set in motion some good people to carry on. But also I said, my heart is saying this is what's important in my life. I have to follow this. And she said, absolutely, you have to do that. But these things come in, but the thing that we find now, because science is exploring meditation constantly. This, to put in perspective, I was saying this in New Zealand, I just remembered it when I was talking, that there was someone in our Portland, Oregon congregation that was taking a comparative religion course, and her thesis was going to be on meditation and the scientific studies. She said the overwhelming problem was the thousands of studies. That was over 25 years ago. There are probably 10 times the number of studies on meditation. And so there's a wealth of information supporting what Master presented in the Autobiography of Yogi. To the degree that we have much more capacity to control what we're doing when we have meditation. And it affects certain parts of the brain. And what's obvious now is that if you have a spiritual or religious focus that includes an authoritarian figure or approach, and it's bound by hard, consequences, that fear and anger tend to dominate that approach, it actually is shown now it damages parts of the brain. It's not just a bad thing, it actually creates a destructive thing in your physiology. Now that's pretty remarkable. The opposite is true, as we know from our teachings, that if you endeavor to have kindness, have compassion, then it grows those parts of the brain. And so what happens is that your natural response mechanism when you meditate is always going to be caring for others. There's a very real effect when you get into fear and anger or defense mechanisms, is that it shows up. You have less likelihood to be sensitive to other people's realities. Interesting, isn't it? And you can see this woven into some of the things that Master has presented in the Autobiography and many other writings and teachings. That idea that this isn't just a good thing, it's a matter of having a life that's going to be fulfilling or not, and, equally important, how you affect the world around you. We're not isolated islands. It's like, I remember in high school, English literature classes, studying John Donne, who, is famous for a lot of quotes, but one of them was, "No man is an island unto himself." That you reverberate even just in your thought process to the world around you. Whether you have action involved in that, those thought processes, they will affect the ones around you. And so when Master would say, environment is stronger than willpower, there's a lot of ways of really feeling what that means. There's the obvious that I better be in an environment that supports what I'm doing because, it's going to be a real effect on you. But there's these other parts to it that are a little bit more subtle and nuanced, is that if we place our positive, aspirational, focused energy in the environment around us, things can change. I was reading this comment from some study, and it sort of said as a matter of fact, and I was like, what? It said that it's proven that if you have a positive, smiling countenance, it affects the world around you. Now, they sort of say it as, of course, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, that's amazing, that's a powerhouse of a construct of life. That changes everything. That means the game plan isn't what I thought it was. When we talk about healing prayers, for instance, it's fascinating that what we're really doing with healing prayers is not focusing on healing a specific outcome for a person, but we're praying that their receptivity is enlivened and expanded. Now, some people aren't clear about that, but I remember this scientific study, and it was very interesting. It was a real, opening revelation, and it was done, I think, in the 1970s in the UK, in the United Kingdom. The scientists were wondering, was healing prayers a hoax or a truth? And they realized they couldn't do it on human beings because there's too many variables. So they did it on alfalfa seeds. And so they just got a tray, a small tray. They put water in it. And they didn't even use a barrier. They just put a string between the two halves. And they had a group of people praying for one half and no prayers for that half. And it was significant, the difference in what the sprouting process was for the seeds that had been prayed for. And so they thought, let's explore some other possibilities. So they stressed the seeds, and they simply put salt in the water, which is a stressor for organisms sprouting. And it was even more significant, the difference. Again, just a string. It wasn't as if, there was a real separation. And they found even more significance of growth in the seeds they prayed for. And then they did this interesting part, and it relates to how Master taught us with healing prayers, is that they had prayers on one side that were specifically oriented to the outcome. These seeds are going to sprout. And the other side was prayed for what they ended up calling the study, "Thy will be done." Interesting, isn't it? So praying for the flow of possibility, surrounding with an aura of energy and magnetism, but not directing, it needs to be this. It was even tremendously radical than any other parts of the experiment, that they found there was greater success when we didn't hold to the expectation, the outcome of something. But we weren't passive. or the people in the prayer group weren't passive. They were dynamically engaged in that experience, but not to project the outcome. And when we talk about environment being stronger than willpower, it means the first step is for us to open up to that possibility of greater energy and magnetism. And what better way than Kriya Yoga? Because it's creating it at the center of who we are, and creating that magnetic flow, so that when we're alive in being centered in that, it's more than an affirmation. It's a direct link to our highest consciousness and our true being inside our own true self, the soul nature. And one of the other things that they've researched is that when you have a strong emotional experience, let's say anger, you respond to something anger, that has effect in your physiology. It isn't just you're thinking it. It sends a chemical reactive process through your physiology, through your body. But what's interesting, that lasts 90 seconds by the time it starts and moves through the body. That chemical reaction is no longer there. If that anger persists, it's because we have chosen to be in that experience of anger. Not necessarily consciously, but subconsciously. And so that gives us the possibility of saying, this can change. I don't have to be roped in to that experience going on. I remember, if you've ever had an experience of adrenaline, for instance, adrenaline is that fight and flight response in your nervous system to protect you. It's a safety measure. Either get out or deal with it in a way. If a fire happens, it's sending you this amazing message that's called adrenaline. Well, I remember I had a car accident when I was in Portland, Oregon. There was an intersection there we're doing construction on, so there was always traffic stoppage, and it would take forever, and people would be coming when they weren't supposed to on the light and all that. And I remember finally it turned green after about 20 minutes. I got up to it, and I just wove my way around one of the traffic barriers, and bam, this car hit me right on. And it was my fault because I kind of ventured out a little bit, and she just caught me. But the airbags deployed. And it was interesting because the car dealership fellow said afterwards, so roughly around 50, what is it in this country?
Kilometers?
Miles to kilometers. So roughly about 50, 55 kilometers per hour is when it'll deploy bags in that way. So that means the two cars together in their speed would have done it. Well, I was creeping along at about 8 kilometers per mile. So this other car was coming. And the difference between our cars was, my car was a Japanese Honda, which has a little bit of metal on it, but not a lot. It's plastic bumpers and all that. And the other car was an old American steel car. So it had much more momentum. And again, my car was total after that. But that adrenaline, I could feel, you can sense it. It's a real tangible experience when you have adrenaline flowing at that great intensity. But because of being on the path, my response, without my consciously making the choice, I got out of my car, sending healing prayers to the other driver. Now, there's no way I could have said, oh, I need to do this. That's not the time factor. It's an immediate discharge. And the adrenaline is fogging the brain greatly at that point. But because of that momentum, it's like the flow from Kriya and all these practices was there in that moment. And as I came closer to the car, there was this elderly woman, and she was cursing. Her response was to curse, and she said, "This is the second accident in 3 weeks." But that was her response, and you could feel she was just enraged. Not at me particularly, but just at circumstances. Well, I went to the police station to write up the traffic report, and I was writing out details, the diagram of how it happened, and the officer at the desk was saying, "So, when did this happen? Was it yesterday?" I said, "No, it just happened 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago." He said, "You seem to be pretty calm." I said, "Oh, didn't notice." Because adrenaline had gone, and like this thing about 90 seconds, I chose to do deep breathing, focus. I did Hong Sa on the way to the police station, and it took that little time to really just say, with divine grace, this can be a different reality. And that's something that, it's training us to be ready to be always in the moment. Whether the moment is a calm, relaxing moment like we did on the outing today, at the Aboriginal site. You could just feel when we sat down, it just felt a calm permeated all of us in that way. But we can do that at any point. We don't have to be reactive. And remember, Kriya works with neutralizing the reactive process. So we don't have to be reactive. We can simply choose. Choosing is an interesting thing because for a lot of people, they do it from their ego, of course. I want this. I'll do this. But if we change it into the experience that I'm doing this with God, and not just saying it, but again, if we're centered within, we're not just saying it, we're simply allowing all parts of us, the conscious, the subconscious, the superconscious, to be in alignment. And so there's a great magnetism in that. And when we're in that experience, then that's true yoga. And that's what Master really came to express to us in different ways, that we have the ability to go beyond hoping for the good things to happen at the end of life into what is our reality now? What's our choice right now? Well, the choice is to be with the divine. Because the brain is set up that the more you tune into God, the more you have the experience of God. I mean, that's science talking. It's not us talking from a spiritual bias. That's what happens to the brain. That the changes will happen constructively if we work with who we are, and the brain will show that as the way. It'll be our supportive actor in what we're doing. It's not like the brain is neutral per se. It's neutral as a certain baseline, but then either goes into habit or creative, constructive energy. And that's a subplot of the whole Mahabharata, where the Bhagavad Gita comes from, is that part of it, playing with those characters that represent those psychological qualities. And so what we have is really an amazing capacity, because there's this thing that they found with meditation in certain studies, and I wish they would do more of it, because it talks about you for meditation to be deeper, it needs relaxed breathing. And this is science. It's not us saying this is a meditation class and we're teaching this. Relaxed breathing, focused sound, so like a mantra, like Hong Sa, and continuous rhythm of doing that. And they talk about it. You have to do it every day. It's a science saying you have to meditate every day. And then it said this interesting thing, that physical movement helps. In Hong Sa, what do we do with this finger? Yeah, so that's much more significant than Master ever revealed. Or in Kriya, we count on our beats. So that's not just a thing in the background that we do. That's actually significant, what they found in studying what meditation, how it operates in this. And when I thought that, I thought, of course, Master had all these things, but he wasn't always explaining them on that level where, we would have appreciated. It was for us to explore and to open up the possibility from our own experience. And I think what all this allows us to appreciate is that it's more about the adventure of living our lives in God than just following, as Sangha pointed out well in his presentation. It's not about just doing it because we're supposed to do it. And again, if the mind is on board from that level, it's not going to be as productive. I mean, I don't know if you've all read Mark Twain, and Huckleberry Finn. Probably Australians don't, or Indians do. Did you read it? So in the story, where Tom Sawyer, is always playing hooky from school, missing school, and his guardian says to him, okay, as a discipline, you're gonna have to whitewash this fence, And he's, like all of us, grumbling because, I don't wanna do this, it's a sunny day, I can go fishing with Huckleberry Finn. And so he does it, and he's just doing this, And then another friend comes by and says, hey, Tom, what you doing? And he says, whitewashing the fence, you wanna help? Yeah. And so other kids come by. At the end, he's having them pay to whitewash the fence. And because he had the magnetism, he caught on right away, being a good hustler, he caught on right away. Well, it's like that in a sense for us. We catch on and realize, if I really do this in a magnetic way, that's a different thing than just coping and doing. Coping, what we know spiritually, but coping also from the way science understands it, it's a very important short-term defense mechanism. It allows us to survive, just like the fight and flight. Coping is a mechanism that allows us to just kind of flatten out things so they're not as intrusive in our lives. But again, just like holding on to anger for 90 seconds, it's counterproductive. If you hold on to coping after a short period, then you get enmeshed in that process, and that's how you live your life. And you see that everywhere. People are just barely coping. But it's just taking that step and saying, how do I lift the energy a little bit? I mean, just a little bit makes a big difference. And if we can make that choice where we're engaged not only from our perspective, but doing it in collaboration with God and Guru, then the possibilities are infinite. Master talks about a lot of things scientific in this, and some of them are footnotes, as Sadhguru pointed out. But he mentions Einstein several times, and he mentions other scientists at other times. And it's just to give us that enlivened experience of, wow, even back then, back in the 40s and 30s that Master's doing these footnotes from, there was this awareness that consciousness is real. And what we can really do with it is just do the simple things in front of us and make sure that our magnetism is completely engaged in that way. Because if we can do that, then, it's like this. It's not so much we're trying to solve the issues in our lives. I mean, that's true, we do that. But more effectively, we attune ourselves to the superconscious to allow the possible solutions to come through us. It's a difference that's radically different. Because our conscious mind doing the best that it can do may not have any idea about other. You talk about the Aboriginal concepts, how they were working. It's that kind of super consciousness. They were tuning in. They weren't trying to do something so much as let that come through them. And for us, that's really important in this time. The world is suffering. There's a tremendous amount of pain in people. I mean, if you read the news today about America, so former President Trump got convicted of the 34 counts against him. But it's just chaos, living in that country and all this. It's so polarized. It's such a dilemma for people. But what I was telling somebody just before we left to come here on our trip, I said it's really about us simply lifting the energy above that level of things. That level of things is going to clogger us. It's going to overwhelm us. It's going to be tension, anxiety, fear, anger. But if we lift above it, if we just open up to the possibility from within our own consciousness and work with energization exercises, then we're able to we're not numb to those experiences, but we're not caught by the intensity on their level. We're changing the playing field. We're changing it so that we can come up with solutions, at least in our neighborhood of influence that we have with other people. Because we know, that if we meditate, it's a constructive step for other people. And the Tom Sawyer effect, as they call it, that other people will ask us, and we've probably been asked that, so what do you do that you're so kind of positive? It's because we're allowing a greater possibility to happen, and we're doing it with constructive steps. And the steps, as Sagar referred to the techniques that Master has presented us, give us a living experience of a real scientific experiment to see what can happen. And that is amazing, that we're open to saying, what can happen here? You know, as Swami Kriyananda often said to us, always ask the question in your life, what is trying to happen here? And it's not so much we're going to get a definitive answer, we're going to get a definitive direction of what to do, where to go, and how to experience that. So we want to leave time for questions if you have any or comments or thoughts. So you know, I had to come up with all that because this young man beside me was so good at presenting every other point.